Good morning, adventurers. My name is Ben, and welcome to a morning show where I sit around, drink some tea, and talk about D&D. So first up for T&D today, we have my mug, the stat-blocked mug. And inside of it, I have some Harney & Sons gunpowder green tea. I put the thing back in the container. That's what I mean by thing. I put it back in the cabinet. And I realized that right after I hit the record button and started shooting. So I'm not going to go get it. But it is there, I promise. I am dangerously low on it. I need to buy myself some more. But that's what's in the cup today. I promise, even though I don't have the thing. Pretend it's right here. Here you go. Pretend it's right there. Anyway. Good enough. Good, what is that called? I don't even know. Good banter, I guess. I'm bantering with myself and pretending that you're talking back to me. So we're just going to go with it and pretend like that is a real thing that's going on. What we are talking about today. We are talking about traps. Traps and how they work. Traps and how to use them. Traps and how they should affect your game. I have talked a little bit about traps before, but I haven't covered them too in depth because I don't really know why. I just haven't. Honestly, traps are not really for me. They are, I use them, and so when I use them, it is baffling to my players, but largely, I am not somebody that traps dungeons extensively. They are full of bad guys instead, unless they are specifically going after, like, a tinkerer or somebody who is, you know, paranoid or something like that, in which case there will be plenty more traps. But I really don't put that many traps in there. I will use environmental hazards, which are a kind of trap, but I will not, you know, specifically put in the tripwire that drops the big, like, swinging scythe blades or anything like that. That's not really my style, quite so much. Not that I haven't used them, I just don't usually. So, let's get to talking about them a little bit, shall we? So, traps. Traps are, in spite of the fact that I just finished talking about how I don't use them, an integral part of the D&D game because they come in many different formats. Pretty much anything that can be considered combative to the player characters could feasibly be considered a trap. Assuming that it is not like the big thing that they're trying to get to do, you know. So like a trap could be a series of like 4 relatively weak enemies on the other side of a door, or it could be the big scythe blades that come down from the ceiling and, you know, try to murder people. It could be either of those things, really. And all of the gray area in between those two as well, obviously. So let's talk a little bit about building them first off. We will go over mechanical stuff first, and then we'll talk a little bit about like the construction of them. So mechanically speaking, traps follow the same DC guidelines and severity guidelines as a lot of other pieces of 5th edition. I'm sorry, I keep looking over here. The cat is deciding to mountain climb up the wall, essentially. But traps use the same DC scale. They use the same general severity scale. So DCs are, they range from very easy to nearly impossible. That's 5 for very easy, 10 for easy, 15 for moderate, 20 for hard, 25 for very hard, and 30 for nearly impossible. Nearly impossible is like God-esque kind of things. And traps oftentimes will come with a pair of DCs associated with them. There is the investigation or detection level DC, essentially, for... What are you doing? He has found a box of wrapping paper and is now pawing through it. So I do apologize if you can hear that in the back. I will maybe turn that down a little bit, and hopefully you can't still hear him. But I am probably a little bit quieter for you now, and I am sorry for that. I will do my best to stay loud. So, there is the detection DC, and there is the actual DC to save against whatever the trap thing is, which is often going to be the same as whatever the DC to disarm said trap is, if it is a disarmable trap. So, oftentimes it is going to be harder to... or it will be harder to either detect or save from the trap, depending upon the goal of the creator, we'll say. So, if it is, you know, the big boulder, like in Indiana Jones, that rolls down towards you and comes and blocks out the whole hallway, probably going to be pretty easy to see. Probably going to be a lot more difficult to get away from. conversely, a like super fine tripwire that shoots a single dart out of the wall or something like that, or a couple of darts, gonna be much harder to notice, but is probably going to be easier to avoid because it is a much smaller area. So you have to think about that when you are doing that general sort of thing. Then there is the damage level / severity. All of this information is on the official 5e DM screen. This guy right here, just the one that you can get at a game store or at Barnes & Noble or something like that. The damage level and severity gives you sort of damage amounts that a trap should deal, theoretically. It's for a lot of different stuff, but for this specifically, we're talking about traps. It is broken down into the 4 different tiers of play, more or less, where it's 1 to 4, 5 to 10, 11 to 16, 17 to 20, which is approximately the right breakdown for that. And they have the different levels of setback, dangerous, and deadly. Setbacks are something that are going to hurt you, but not necessarily be crippling. Dangerous are things that will probably hurt you badly and might really sort of affect the way that you go into something. And deadly is, as noted, something that could potentially kill you, if not seriously injure you. So be careful with using deadly traps, unless you have a massively overpowered party for some reason or another. Taking these 2 things sort of into consideration when you go to actually construct your traps, I have talked about this before. I will talk about it again. I'm sure I like to work on building on theme for whatever it is that I am trying to create here. So a monster that is, of a lower intelligence, maybe a lower wisdom score, that sort of thing, they are going to have a lot more crude, but probably beefy or more bludgeoning kind of trap, like things that will just sort of like hurt people more. Whereas if I am working with somebody who is a lot more like conniving and maniacal, high intelligence, sort of very calculatory. I don't know which one it is. I don't know. They're going to have probably some more refined traps that will maybe inflict status conditions but deal less damage, or they will do types of damage that are not going to be like bludgeoning, piercing, slashing, or acid or something like that. If there's like a bucket of acid as a door trap, they're going to be things that it would take a little bit more know-how to actually construct, but it wouldn't necessarily be something that is going to deal as much damage. I like to use like status conditions on occasion, exhaustion, that sort of thing, paired with a little bit of damage, as opposed to just like full damage all the time. Because full damage all the time is fun, but also it is, what it is then. Now, in terms of placement of traps, and this is the reason that I really don't use traps all that much, I refuse to just litter traps throughout every single dungeon I ever create, unless there's a super, super, super good reason for there to be a lot of them in there. The party will run into maybe 2 of them. Honestly, just like a couple of them. In the traditional traps kind of sense. Obviously, as I mentioned, I will fill it with monsters, fill it with enemies, fill it with stuff for them to have to deal with, because I am of the opinion that adventurers should have to, like, deal with stuff, but it will not be, all trap stuff all the time. Because when I put together traps, like to try and not make it something that is punishing to the players for not immediately assuming that there's going to be something they're trying to murder them at every turn. That seems like it feels like something that will like build on that whole combative mindset to me, which does mean that every once in a while you can just like rip the rug out from under your players and surprise them with something. But if you are setting up trap after trap after trap, it builds a lot of mistrust with the world that they are in. Even if, it is specifically with, I don't know, doors or windows or something like that, they start to not trust the way that the game works sometimes, because traps are a good thing to be able to, like, toss in at the last second and be like, actually, you open the door and a boulder falls on you, or something like that. So they feel a little cheap sometimes. And you don't want that mentality from your players, whether it's conscious or not, because that'll make the rest of the game a lot harder to deal with. So if I am adding traps that I specifically want them to have to interact with, I will oftentimes use passive skills as part of the trap detection. Passive perception, passive investigation. People will be able to notice things are off as they come to them without having to stop and go, okay, what's wrong with this now? What do I do here? But if, say, the rogue who has really bad perception but really good investigation comes up to something, and it is a perception-based trap more than an investigate, like as they are walking up, they sort of need to notice the glyphs around the door or something like that, and they don't really pick up on it. That bummer, because by the time they get close enough to really investigate it, it's too late, and they have set the trap off. And so it sort of motivates keeping people cycling through these different roles as well. Because on the one hand, while you want to have somebody who is up front who can investigate and perceive and stuff like that, you also want to have somebody who's like that at the back of the party. And if you only have, 4 people in your party, that's pretty much everybody right there. You can account for a lot of different party roles immediately like that, just because they don't want to get attacked from behind, and they don't want to get jumped on by a giant axe that comes down from the ceiling, or dumped acid on top of them or something like that. So traps are effective ways to keep the party dynamic moving, I think, and effective ways to use those passive skills while helping your players feel like they are really the awesome heroes at the center of the adventure that they are. Because, that's the whole point. They're playing the game to be those heroes that are, center of the whole thing, and being really, really cool at the same time. Now, in conjunction with that, I think it's important to not rely exclusively on sight for seeing and noticing traps. Because sometimes you just don't see things. But it is important this is where part of your, passive skills comes in. I have a party with a Loxodon in it. They get advantage on perception checks using smell. Well, advantage calculates out to a +5 modifier. So their passive perception for smell specifically is their passive perception +5. And that would be able to detect things that people who are relying on sight would not be able to detect. So if she is walking along and she smells like something super acidic or sour or sulfurous or something like that, she would be able to be like, okay, hang on guys, what's going on here? And even though she doesn't have the highest passive perception all the time, it would be something that would be able to give her a leadership role in that situation. Which is great because D&D is all about sharing the stage. So being able to sort of pass around that role as that person by utilizing very specific skills that other people have. None of this is also to say that you are required to use perception or investigation on this. Nature is a really great skill in this instance as well. Sometimes religion is really good. If you're walking up to a wall and you see some religious iconography, and the cleric or monk or whoever has studied religion looks at it and goes, huh, well, that's not right. It gives people the opportunity to be better at their skills that they have chosen to be good at. They pick them for a reason, because they want their character to excel in those areas. So give them that opportunity with something as menial as traps sometimes. So, sorry, all of that to say, I don't like traps that much, but traps are very good, and you should use them often enough. When you are building traps and choosing which ones to use, definitely, as I mentioned before, think about the mentality of the person that is putting them in place. It's not you, it's not the DM, it is whoever would have trapped the area. Make sure that it makes sense for there to be a trap there, because otherwise you have just put it in there for no discernible reason. So make sure that it does, in fact, check out that there would be a trap there, and then go ahead and give some kind of interesting thing with that trap. When you get to higher levels, things like glyphs of warding or symbols or stuff like that are really, really phenomenal traps to be able to place, because they're magical traps that you can trap other spell effects in. You can have a polymorph trap set with a glyph of warding, I believe with a symbol as well. But you can have that sitting on the ground, and then it goes off, somebody has to make a wisdom saving throw, or be turned into a goat or something like that. It makes so much more sense to have something like that in a magic user's area as opposed to something that is just this giant piston of rock that shoots out from the wall and slams into the adventurers. Like, that's cool and that's fun, and that is something to work around, but it is not something that you are going to necessarily find in somebody who is physically not capable enough to build out that huge rock thing, or doesn't have minions to build out that huge rock thing. One of the biggest places where there are definitely going to be traps are going to be like mages, towers, and lairs, places where you don't get a lot of foot traffic. If you are going into a stronghold of some sort and there are traps everywhere and it's full of people, that doesn't thematically make sense with the area, because people have to walk through there on your average day. They would be disarming traps and rearming traps for 2/3 of their life, and that doesn't make a whole lot of sense at all. But if you come to a place that is mostly abandoned, or it is occupied by very, very few people, or there are areas that people don't really go down, that is where you can be putting some traps in. Because if you're putting traps in there, then you know for sure that your enemies that you have created for your players are not going to be going down that way. Because if they are going down that way, then they are going to have to take the time out of their day to disarm the trap and then rearm the trap when they're done there. And think about it, you as a person wouldn't want to do that. So why would your enemies want to do that? If you can come up with a good reason, great, throw them in there. If you can't, I don't know that I would use it there. So that is, I believe, everything I want to talk to you guys about regarding using traps in different places, along with building them a little bit. You know, these are like 15, 20-minute episodes. I only have so much time. But moving on to the shows that we have coming out today. It is Tuesday, which means that we have Diary of a Dragon Pit, Star Wars First Resistance, Dungeons and Daddies, Bombarded, Hekva D&D, Glass Cannon, and The Queer Questers. Please, please, please go check them out. Let them know that I sent you. I was talking to somebody I work with literally today about how she's not sure what she is going to do with regard to what D&D show she is going to consume following her finishing of NADPOD, which she's in right now. And I said, well, boy, do I have a list for you. And so I gave her the whole list of places, or of different shows, and she's going to check some of them out. You guys should too. They're good shows, I promise. So anyway, all that said, that is everything I have to talk to you guys about today. Thank you so very much for making me part of your morning routine. I really do appreciate it. And thank you so very much to my patrons in particular. You guys are the ones that make this show possible. If you are one of my patrons, make sure you check out Patreon for the show poll that is going on right now. Voting closes tomorrow, when this show airs tomorrow. So get your votes in today, and we will figure out what we're talking about on Friday with it. Because that's fun. Also, if you are one of my patrons that has access to suggesting shows, suggest some shows, because why wouldn't you? It helps you create the content that or it helps you get the content you want me to create. There we go. So definitely check that out. And if you aren't sure what I'm talking about, link to my Patreon is in the description. Thanks so much, guys. Anyway, all that said, don't forget, everybody, drink tea, play D&D, and keep on rolling.